Gordy, you have been a tireless advocate for our veterans and their families, and you have truly, truly made a difference. It is our honor to recognize you tonight with this award.
Thank you.
Ron, don't go anywhere. Come back. And now Ron Flagg will help introduce our second honoree, who I know very well and I also know is very deserving.
Gordon has a few
Oh, did you want to say a few words? That's not in the program. Oh, it's in red. I'm sorry. I have it. Gordon, please.
Okay. I'm going to move it.
I know. I'm sorry. Lawyer gets to talk.
Yeah. That's rule number one, yes. I want to thank you, Jake, for those kind remarks. I want to also thank NVLSP. I feel like I'm in a real friendly atmosphere for one of the few times in my life. I've usually been in the courtroom where things are not quite so friendly. I also want to acknowledge the deep commitment made by the law firm of Morrison Foerster and my colleagues at Morrison Foerster over the years, dating back to the 1980s. And several people I've worked with are here today, including Bob Loeffler, Brian Busey, Brian Matsui, and Brad Louie. But it was really a very large commitment of our firm on many cases over a long period of time. Rather than cajole you with a few war stories, of which I have many, including, for example, what happened the day I took Ron Abrams' deposition 25 years ago, I want to pose the question of what is the status of veterans in America today. On the surface, we have what might be called a bountiful program of benefits. If you read the statutes and the rules and the regulations, it looks pretty darn good. What is the problem then, and why do we have such a crisis in the delivery of mental health care benefits to veterans today? I suggest that this disconnect between the promise and the delivery is due to some structural problems in the way the system is organized that I've been fighting against for many, many years. And there are several of them. One is veterans still cannot hire a lawyer on the regional office level. So they're deprived of access to legal services, except pro bono services. It shows why NVLSP is so important, by the way. Until 1990, there was an absolute prohibition on judicial review. You couldn't get a review of a VA decision. You couldn't get any court to take any action on any veteran's case, with the possible exception of a constitutional case. And even today, with judicial review, the judicial review is very cramped and very narrow. The Veterans Court has a very narrow jurisdiction. It can only review a decision in an individual veteran's case. That's it. It cannot do what Article III courts, which are the normal federal courts, do, which is to handle discovery and class action procedures, issue declaratory orders, issue injunctions, which are very important, a very important remedy. And so the Veterans Court is rather toothless, and actually some of the justices on that court have acknowledged this in public speeches. And then third, we have the Ferris Doctrine, you may have heard of. It's kind of an abstruse Supreme Court case from the 1950s, but it provided that the government is, in effect, immune from any lawsuits by veterans. They're the only ones that are basically excluded, even though that exception is not in the statute. What has happened is that veterans have a lot of rights on paper, but they're at the same time, and it's kind of ironic, there are all these obstacles for them to ever enforce those rights. And even more recently, in recent years, the statutes governing jurisdiction have been interpreted in such a way as to virtually bar the door of veterans to federal courts altogether. It is a sad fact in America that veterans are the only group that cannot get relief in a federal court. And I'm talking about any relief on anything. I mean, they can always go to the Veterans Court for their review of their VA claims, but I'm talking about if some pattern and practice of discrimination exists. The veteran wants to bring against the Veterans Administration. No relief. And This is just a travesty in America that this continues to exist. And I've been working with NVLSP for many, many years about many of these problems. But who do we blame for this? Well, we can, in some sense, blame Congress for passing these statutes, these door-closing statutes on jurisdiction, I suppose. But what is missed is, and we can also blame the Veterans Administration, which every time a veteran files a case, hires an army of lawyers who go in and try to get the case dismissed and raise everything under the sun. But I also think, and since I am just recently retired from the practice of law, I can say this openly, I think we have a real problem with our judiciary. The cases, and I've seen many of them, are very hostile to veterans. And I don't think anyone's ever really called out our judiciary on this. There's a rare case indeed where the veteran gets a fair shake in federal court. And there's a Supreme Court case called Robeson that stands for the proposition that if a veteran brings a constitutional claim and there's no other place he can bring that claim, that the federal courts have to be open to the veterans. And that has become virtually a dead letter in America today. So as we sit here and you think about the work NVLSP does, it is so important because the veteran has an incredible need because there's so many of them, and more than 2 million coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. And on the other side, the remedies are very, very few. And try to find a pro bono lawyer in America is tough for millions of people. There's just not enough services available. So, in concluding, I think a lot of the problems you see in the papers today, the problems with veterans, delay, millions of claims backlogged, the problems with veteran suicides and lack of health care, denial of health care that have led to suicides, are really caused by these impediments in the way of remedies. There's just nothing these people can do, and that is why we have these kinds of problems today. And I had a client, and in closing, that I think taught me something that Marines no one other than Marines are supposed to know. He talked to me a lot about Semper Fidelis. And every time Phil Cushman, every time I talked to him, he always said at the end of the conversation, Semper Fi. I think as we think about these issues and the plight that our veterans face, we all need to think about Semper Fi, Semper Fidelis. Semper Fi in times of war, Semper Fi in times of peace, Semper Fi by both political parties, Semper Fi by our legislators, Semper Fi by our judges, Semper Fi by our VA employees and other administrators, and by our government attorneys too. And Semper Fi in times of plenty, and Semper Fi in times of budgetary constraints and deficits like today. Thank you. It was a big day because, as I said, I feel very comfortable with NVLSP because I've known Bart and Ron and everyone for 30 years. And I've been working on these issues for a long time, as they have been. So to see your fellow soldiers, so to speak, and to be in front of them and be acknowledged is really meaningful.
And then what led you to be so involved in veterans work all these years?
It really was my dad. My dad was a scientist at Operation Crossroads, was in the water after the atomic bomb test doing experiments, and unfortunately contracted leukemia at a very young age and died. That's how I got started doing work, actually with atomic veterans, and then I worked my way into Agent Orange and PTSD and chemical and biological weapons test participants. Those have been my specialties over the years. Some individual cases, and then some class action cases, which I think are important to try to change things for more than one person.